Katrina, text by Ed Hansen, illustrations by Scott Wakefield. It's summer and it's very hot in New Orleans. Julie and her friend, Marcy, are trying to keep cool. But one night, news comes through that a hurricane called Katrina is heading their way. Suddenly, they are involved in a real emergency. Katrina, text by Ed Hansen, illustrations by Scott Wakefield. Chapter 1. Julie Booker lived with her mother and her dog Toby in New Orleans in the southern United States. They had a small first-floor apartment that overlooked a busy street. It wasn't busy because of cars. In fact, very few cars came down their street. It was busy because of people visiting all the small shops on the street. Almost all of the buildings had shops at street level and apartments above. Julie's apartment had a small balcony with an iron railing. Their front porch, as Julie and her mother called it, overlooked the street. Most mornings, Julie would lean on the railing and watch the shop owners opening up for business. Many of them knew Julie and would look up and wave to her. She would wave back while Toby would stick his head between the railings and bark. The New Orleans that Julie lived in was not the New Orleans of the tourists. The fancy restaurants and glitzy jazz clubs of Bourbon Street were not part of Julie's life. She lived in a ward, as they were called, in St. Bernard's Parish. Her world consisted of the street she lived on and several streets in each direction. Within that area, she had most of her friends, her school, and a park where she spent a lot of time playing. In the summer, the air in New Orleans is hot, humid, and sticky. "Mama," Julie would ask, "why can't we buy an air conditioner?" The answer was always the same. "I'll get one as soon as I've saved enough money." Besides, her mother would add, "we have 2 fans and they do just fine." "They don't help. All they do is blow more hot, sticky air at me," moaned Julie. Mama sighed and said, "It's all we have for now, so you will just have to make the best of it." Today was Wednesday, the 24th of August. Julie's school would be opening in just 2 more weeks. She could hardly wait. She liked school and looked forward to seeing all her friends. And there was something else. The classrooms were air-conditioned. At last, she thought, I'll be able to get out of this awful heat. Julie's mother worked as a waitress at a hotel restaurant about 4 blocks from where they lived. She would leave every morning at 8:30 so that she could be at work by 9. Every morning in the summer, Julie had some strict rules to follow. She had to wash the breakfast dishes and clean up the apartment while Mama got dressed. Then the 2 of them would walk to the apartment of Mrs. George, who looked after Julie and some of the other neighborhood kids whose mothers worked. But today, Julie had almost finished her jobs when she heard her friend Marcy calling her from the street. She ran out to the porch with Toby right behind her. She looked down and saw Marcy and a couple of other friends. "Come on down," Marcy shouted. "We're going to the park." "Okay, I'll be down in a minute." Julie kissed her mother goodbye, and with Toby at her heels, she bounded downstairs and joined her friends on the street. They all ran to Mrs. George's house so that Julie could ask permission to go to the park. Mrs. George said that Julie could go, but she must be back by lunchtime. The park, just a block away, was the place to go during the summer. It had a playing field, swings, slides, a pool, and sprinklers. The pool and sprinklers got lots of use on these hot summer days. Even Toby couldn't wait to run through them. After everyone had run through the sprinklers and cooled off, they sat down in the shade of a big moss-covered oak tree. Charlie Green was 1 year older than Julie and Marcy. He was going into 4th grade. He grinned at the girls and said, "Last night, My uncle came over for supper, and he gave me a puzzle to solve. Marcy laughed and said, "Well, knowing you, Charlie, I bet you didn't solve it." "Do you guys want to try it?" he said with a smirk. "Sure," Julie answered. "Okay, here it is. A man wants to hire you for a month to work for him." "What kind of work?" asked Marcy in a serious voice. "I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's not part of the puzzle," Charlie replied. "Well, how do I know if I want the job, if I don't know what it is?" Charlie was losing patience. "Marcy, do you want to hear this puzzle or not?" Okay. We'll take the job even though we don't know what it is," Marcy said with a grin. "Now, the man is willing to pay you in one of two ways, but you have to decide which way. He will pay you either $1,000 a day for all 30 days, or a cent for the first day and double the amount every day. In other words, you would get 1 cent the first day, 2 cents the second day, 4 cents the third day, and so on. Which way would you choose?" Julie was still thinking about it when Marcy shouted, "Oh, that's easy, Charlie. I'd take $1,000 a day. At the end of that month, I'd have $30,000. She turned to Julie and said very seriously, "I'd buy a new car, or maybe a pony." Charlie laughed and said, "Boy, am I glad you don't take care of my money. A cent a day, double that for 30 days? Why, that's over $10 million. No way," Marcy yelled. "Get a pencil and a piece of paper and work it out. You'll see." 15 minutes later, Marcy and Julie were still scribbling, puzzled. So Charlie showed them how his uncle had solved the problem. Doubling the cent each day until a day's pay was over $10 million. And it had all started with a cent. On the way home from the park, they always stopped by Bolden's Market because it was air-conditioned. They would take their time studying the items on the shelves until Mr. Bolden made them leave. Finally, one day, Mr. Bolden said, "You kids can't come in here anymore unless you buy something." After that, they would pull whatever money they had and could usually come up with 25 or 30 cents. Their small purchase took over 10 minutes just because they wanted to stay in the air-conditioned shop as long as possible. Mr. Bolden would shake his head in frustration, but what could he do? They were now paying customers. Chapter 2. The next morning, Julie walked into the kitchen and poured some cereal and milk into a bowl. Her mother was watching the morning news on television. Julie could hear the announcer's voice clearly. The National Hurricane Center reports that a new tropical depression has formed over the Bahamas. It is expected to gain strength as it approaches southern Florida. The storm has been named Katrina. "Wow, another storm. I'm sure glad we don't live in Florida," Julie said. "Me too. I've lost count, but I think they have been hit by 3 hurricanes already this season," Mama said. "Well, maybe they'll be lucky this time, and the storm will miss them." "That's fine, dear, just so long as it doesn't miss them and hit us." Julie laughed and said, "Fat chance of that happening. Nothing exciting ever happens here in New Orleans." Toby was sitting on Julie's lap, sharing her cereal. "Julie," her mother shouted, "how many times have I told you not to feed him from the table? But he's my pal, Mama. And he just loves cereal. That dog spends all day with you. He sleeps on your bed at night. I think he will still be your pal even if he can't eat from your dish." Julie shrugged and pushed Toby down onto the floor. The dog looked at her with sad eyes as if to say, "Why are you doing this to me?" Julie looked down and said, "It's not my fault, old buddy. Mama won't let you share my cereal." When they had finished breakfast, Julie's mother went into the bedroom to dress for work and Julie started on her jobs. When she was finished, She went out to the porch and looked down on the busy street. All the shops were open and there were people everywhere. She looked down at Toby. "After we go to Mrs. George's, do you want to take a walk down to Marcy's?" Toby wagged his tail and ran in circles, something he always did when he got excited. Marcy lived at the far end of the street, in one of the few buildings with a ground floor apartment. She shared the apartment with her parents and her older sister. Their apartment had a large porch facing onto the street. There were 5 big pink wooden pelicans on the porch railing. Everyone who passed would stop, look at the pelicans, and smile. Julie and Toby walked down the block where some of the shop owners were using hoses to wash down the footpath in front of their shops. Toby ran in and out of the gutter, splashing in the watery runoff. Marcy and her sister, Patty, were sitting on the porch when Julie arrived. "Here comes trouble," Patty said jokingly. "And a good morning to you too," Julie replied with a grin. Toby jumped onto Patty's lap. Patty didn't care too much for dogs, especially muddy ones, and Toby seemed to know it. She jumped up and yelled, "Hey, get this mutt off me!" "He's just showing that he loves you," said Julie. "Well, I don't love him. Now I'll have to change my clothes," she said as she went into the house. "Your sister sure doesn't like animals, does she?" Julie said to Marcy. "Don't pay any attention to her," Marcy replied as she sat rubbing Toby's ears. "What do you want to do today?" asked Julie. "I don't know. Have you got any ideas?" "I guess we could go back to the park. At least we can cool off there." "Okay," Marcy answered. Then she added, "I sure will be glad when school starts." That evening, Julie sat in the kitchen with her mother, having supper and watching the news on TV. Tropical Storm Katrina is now a Category 1 hurricane. The storm is expected to make landfall in southern Florida sometime during the night. Minor damage is expected. Chapter 3. The next morning, Julie could see that her mother was very worried. She was drinking coffee and watching the television. "What's the matter, Mama?" she asked. "Listen," was all Mama said. The television station's weather person was speaking in a serious voice. Hurricane Katrina slammed into southern Florida during the night. But then a strange thing happened. Instead of turning north, as earlier storms have done, it turned south. Then it turned west and headed out into the Gulf of Mexico. At present, it is gaining strength over the warm Gulf waters and starting to turn north. A hurricane watch is now in effect for Louisiana and Mississippi. The storm is getting a lot worse, and it's heading this way. Katrina has been upgraded to a Category 3 hurricane. "What does that mean?" Julie asked her mother. "There is a scale of 1 to 5 for hurricanes," answered Mama. A Category 3 hurricane, they say, has winds up to 200 kilometers per hour and 4-meter waves. There could be a lot of damage, loss of electricity, and probably some flooding. "The governor is talking about everyone leaving the coastal areas," answered Mama. "Are we going to leave?" "I don't see how we can," Mama said very quietly. "We don't have a car, and we really don't have any place to go. Besides, the news reports say that the roads are jammed with cars already. We're probably safer right here, but we had better start making some plans." "Like what, Mama?" "I'll go to the market and stock up on food. You can go to the hardware store and get some candles and batteries. We'll need those things if we lose our electricity." Julie thought for a minute and then said, "While you're at the market, I'll fill all the containers I can find with fresh water. I read once that water can run short during a storm." "Good idea, honey. I feel better already." Julie filled all the large pots and buckets she could find with water. Then she put the plug in the bath and began running water into it. When it was half full, she turned off the tap. That should give us enough water for a week, she thought. Then she took the money her mother had given her and headed to the hardware shop. It was crowded because lots of people had the same idea. Julie was lucky and got 8 batteries and the last 4 candles. On the way home, Julie passed people bringing loose items from their gardens and porches inside. Many of the shop owners were nailing sheets of plywood over their windows. She looked down at Toby and said, "Everyone is getting ready for the storm." Toby wagged his tail and followed her up the street to their apartment. When Julie got back home, she turned on the television. A weather person was giving a lesson on hurricanes. Julie sat glued to the set, listening to every word. He talked about the 5 levels or categories of hurricane, with higher numbers for stronger storms. He spoke of how their strength grows as they pass over warm water. Since the Gulf of Mexico is quite warm, the storm could get much stronger by the time it reached New Orleans. He also warned listeners about what damage to expect. It was scary. Maybe we should have tried to leave, Julie thought. Storm classifications. Tropical storm. 63 to 118 kilometers per hour. Hurricane, Category 1. 119 to 153 kilometers per hour. Hurricane, Category 2. 154 to 177 kilometers per hour. Hurricane, Category 3. 178 to 209 kilometers per hour. Hurricane, Category 4. 210 to 249 kilometers per hour. Hurricane, Category 5. 250 and over kilometers per hour. Just when she thought she had heard all the bad news, the weather person said something that gave Julie goosebumps. It was something she had not known, something that had made New Orleans the worst American city to be in during a major hurricane. New Orleans is below sea level, the weather person said. Many years ago, large levees had been created to hold back floodwaters. Hurricanes almost always bring floods, and an increase in water level of 50 centimeters to 1 meter is normal. But if the levees surrounding New Orleans were to fail, parts of the city would be under 3 meters of water. The wall of water would rip buildings from their foundations. It would toss cars around like toys. Julie heard her mother coming up the stairs and ran to help her with the groceries. "Mama, is it too late to get out of here?" "I'm afraid it is, dear. But we are not alone. I met a lot of people at the market who plan to ride out the storm. The mayor is opening the Superdome as a shelter for people who need it. If things get too bad here, we'll just have to go to the stadium." "Oh, great," said Julie. "How are we supposed to get there? Swim?" "Now don't be negative, Julie. We have plenty of food and water, and we live on the first floor. That's a plus. I hope you're right, Mama." Julie helped her mother unpack the bags. There was powdered milk, sacks of rice and beans, sliced ham, soup and crackers, some apples, and 2 big bags of ice to help keep the refrigerator cold. That night, Julie thought Toby was sick. He lay on her bed shaking and whimpering. She tried to comfort him. As she stroked his trembling body, she remembered something she had heard about the terrible tsunami almost a year earlier. Many animals had escaped because they had moved to higher ground before the tsunami hit. She wondered whether it was true, as some people believed that animals can sense such dangers in advance. Did Toby know what was coming? The next morning, Julie awoke to a bright sunny day. No rain, no wind, no storm. She walked out onto the porch and looked down on an almost deserted street. All the hustle and bustle of yesterday was gone. One man was still nailing up plywood, but except for him, the street was empty. Julie's mother came out to join her. "Where's the storm, Mama?" "Oh, it's coming. This is just the quiet before the storm. In fact, Katrina is now a Category 4 hurricane. I'll start your breakfast. You take Toby out for a walk." When they got to the street, Toby gave Julie a strange look. Suddenly, he ran down the street, slipped behind a fence, and disappeared into an alley. Julie ran after him, calling his name, but he didn't look back. When she got to the alley, there was no sign of him. She searched through the neighbouring yards and driveways. He was nowhere to be found. Toby had run away. In the 3 years Julie had had him, he had never left her side. She headed back home in tears. Her mother tried to comfort her, but it was no use. Between sobs, Julie kept saying, "Why would he run away?" Mama had no answer for her except to say, "He'll come back." But in her heart she wondered if he ever would. "There's nothing we can do just sitting here, and it'll be hours before the storm hits. Why don't we go and look for him?" Mama suggested. Their part of the city had become a ghost town. Shops were boarded up. There was not a car to be seen, and very few people. Many people had left, and those who stayed were huddled in their homes. Julie and her mother walked for 2 hours calling Toby's name, but they didn't find him. Soon the sun disappeared as dark clouds began rolling in, and the first drops of rain began to fall. "We'd better get back to the house, Julie," Mama said. "We mustn't be out here when the storm hits." Julie knew her mother was right. She fought hard to hold back tears as they headed back to the house. Chapter 4. By 7 that evening, it was as dark as night, and the wind was blowing harder. It sounded like a train. The rain was coming down in buckets and forming large puddles in the street. Just before the power went out at 9, they heard another news report. Hurricane Katrina is bearing down on the Louisiana coast. Heavy damage and flooding are expected all along the coast. It is now a Category 4 storm and maybe a Category 5 by the time it reaches the mainland. The governor has ordered an immediate evacuation. All residents are urged to leave. Now not only was it dark, with the air full of frightening sounds, but the little apartment had become almost unbearably hot and sticky. It was always hot in the summer, but now, with the windows shut tight because of the blowing rain, there was no air movement at all. And with no electricity, there wasn't even a fan to help cool them. Julie wanted to go out on the porch and stand in the rain to cool off, but that was not a good idea. Because of the wind, all kinds of things were flying through the air. As uncomfortable as it was inside the house, it was safer than being outside. Sleep was almost impossible in the heat and humidity, but even worse was the howling of the wind. The noise was constant and frightening. Every few minutes a piece of debris would fly through the air and slam into the side of the house. Julie worried that something would come crashing through a window. She finally fell asleep at around 2 a.m. She woke at 7, soaked in perspiration. She had never been so miserable. On top of everything else, she couldn't help wondering where Toby was and how he was doing. Julie's mother was at the kitchen table, putting new batteries into a little portable radio. She played with the dial until a station came in clearly. They didn't say a word. They just sat down and listened. Our worst nightmare has happened. A section of one of the levees has caved in. Water is pouring into the city. These floodwaters are destroying everything in their path. Parts of the city are under 2 meters of water, and it will only get worse. The governor has asked the president to declare New Orleans a national disaster area. Julie ran to the windows at the front of the house and looked down the street. She couldn't tell how deep the water was, but the street was totally flooded. She opened the doors to the porch to get a better look. A terrible smell hit her, and she shut the door quickly. It was the unmistakable odor of an open sewer. She stared at the street through the window. All sorts of debris and rubbish were floating by. The water in the street was filthy. Julie ran back into the kitchen and told her mother what she had seen. Mama, fearing the worst, ran into the bathroom and looked at the toilet. It was overflowing and was unusable. "What else can happen?" she sighed. The winds were now at full force. Many houses were being torn apart, but their own building was holding up well. Julie's mother realized that the larger, higher buildings on both sides of them gave some protection from the storm. Julie and her mother played board games for most of the day to pass the time. Late in the afternoon, they checked the news again. Another levee has given way. In parts of New Orleans, whole streets have been destroyed. The National Guard is being called in to help with rescue efforts. The sewer system has backed up, and in many areas bathrooms are unusable. Mama looked at the radio and said, "Why don't you tell us something we don't already know?" After eating a bowl of cold soup, Julie went back to the window. The water in the street was deeper now, and she felt sure that all the shops on the ground floor were flooded. She was standing staring at the street when something came into view. At first she couldn't make it out. Maybe her mind refused to accept it. A few moments later, she cried out, "Oh no!" "What is it, dear?" Mama asked, running over to the window. Julie pointed to the middle of the street and said, "Look!" Floating in the filth was a section of porch with several large pink pelicans attached to it. "They're from Marcy's house," Julie cried. Mama put her arm around her daughter and said, "I know, dear. I wish I knew they were okay." "Marcy will be fine. She's probably sitting in the Superdome right now worrying about you," her mother replied. For the second night in a row, Julie found sleep impossible. She was tired and wanted to sleep, but the unbearable heat and humidity, the sound of the wind, and the worry made it impossible. She finally dozed off, thinking about Bolden's air-conditioned market. Chapter 5. The next morning when Julie woke, there was a strange quietness. She sat up in bed and listened. There was no more roaring wind or pounding rain. The only thing she could hear was the portable radio in the kitchen. She crawled out of bed and took off her nightgown, which was soaked with perspiration. It has got to be 38 degrees in this room, she thought. She slipped into some dry clothes and went into the kitchen. "Is the storm over?" she asked. Her mother turned and said, "Yes, darling, but it has destroyed our city. 80% of New Orleans is under 2 meters of water. Nothing is running. Nothing is working. Even the Superdome was badly damaged. The people who went there for safety are being moved. It'll be months before this city can be lived in again, so we have to leave." "But how are we going to get out of here, Mama?" "The National Guard and others will be patrolling in boats. We just have to be ready to flag them down when they come along our street. Right now, I want you to pack a bag with your most important things. I've already packed mine. Then we can take turns sitting on the porch watching for a boat." "Where will they take us? And then where will we go?" "I'm not sure, but I know it will be a better place than where we are now." After Julie had packed, she opened the doors and stepped out onto the porch. The smell was still there, but it wasn't as bad as it had been. It was still warm, but not nearly as stuffy and uncomfortable as inside the apartment. She dragged a chair out onto the porch and sat down. The fresh air felt good, but the water was still halfway up the doors on the ground floor shops. Julie worked out that it had to be 1.5 to 2 meters deep. Mama was right, she thought. We are lucky to be on the first floor. A few minutes later, her mother came out onto the porch with her breakfast. They took turns sitting and watching for a rescue boat. By mid-afternoon, none had come. "Gee, Mama, maybe they missed this street," Julie said. "I don't think so," Mama replied. "This is a big city. If a small boat picks up 3 or 4 people, it probably has to take them to safety before it can get anyone else. So it's a slow process." Just before dark, Julie heard the hum of an outboard motor. Soon she could see the boat coming slowly up the middle of the street. She called her mother and together they waved to the men in the boat. They wore military uniforms, and as the boat slowed in front of their building, one of the men smiled and said, "Would you ladies like a ride?" "Give us a second to grab our suitcases and we will be right down," yelled Mama. As they were starting down the stairs, Julie looked back in sadness at the place that had been her home. "Mama," she said, "do you think we will ever come back here?" "I don't know, dear. I just don't know." At street level, the water was so deep they had to get into the boat from the top step. "I'm Sergeant Peters. I'm with the Louisiana National Guard," said one of the men. He took their bags and helped them into the boat. "Where are you taking us?" asked Julie. "There is high ground at the north end of the city. There are no flood waters there. A tent city has been set up by the Red Cross. It's not fancy, but it's safe and there's food and hot showers." "Oh, Mama, a hot shower! Won't that be great?" cried Julie. The man driving the boat started to laugh. "What's so funny?" asked Julie. He smiled and said, "Almost every person we have rescued today has talked about a hot shower. It was more important than food, water, or anything else. I guess we don't realize how important a shower is until we have to go without one for a few days." The trip to the north side of the city took 20 minutes. For the first time, Julie could see how serious the damage was. They passed neighborhoods where every house was destroyed. Mattresses, couches, chairs and tables were floating in the water. One house had no wall, and a car was upside down in the living room. Minutes later, Julie saw a cat stranded on a garage roof. "Look," she yelled to the man driving the boat, pointing to the cat. "I guess we have room for that little fellow," he said. He slowed the boat and guided it over to the garage. Sergeant Peters grabbed the cat and handed it to Julie. "I wonder how long it has been since it had something to eat," Julie said. Before anyone could answer Julie's question, Mama shouted, "Oh no! There's a body in the water!" 9 meters away, floating face down, was the body of a man. A mass of white hair gave away his age. The men made no attempt to recover the body. "Are you just going to leave him there?" Mama asked. "Our job is to rescue the living. There are other boats out searching for bodies." "Are they finding many?" asked Julie. "I'm afraid so, little one," said Sergeant Peters. "The storm has taken many lives." Julie continued to stroke the cat. Soon it relaxed and began to purr. It made her feel better to hold the warm living creature. Chapter 6. 10 minutes later, the small boat reached the landing area for the tent city. The National Guardsman directed Julie and her mother to the registration area. Julie handed the cat to Sergeant Peters and they climbed out of the boat. After signing in, they were assigned to a tent and given a few supplies such as soap, shampoo and towels. It didn't take long before they both headed to the showers to bathe for the first time in days. Walking back to their tent, Julie said, "Doesn't it feel good to be clean, Mama?" "It sure does, honey." They were passing by a long row of tents when someone yelled, "Hey, Julie!" Both Julie and her mother turned and saw a smiling Marcy running out of one of the tents. "Marcy!" screamed Julie. "I've been so worried about you." The two girls threw their arms around each other. "I've been worried about you too." "When did you get here?" said Marcy. "We just arrived. How about you? How long have you been here?" "Tomorrow will be our 3rd day. Our house was destroyed." "I know. I saw part of it floating down the street. I knew it was your place because of the pink pelicans." "Where's Toby?" asked Marcy. "He ran away just before the hurricane hit. I don't know where he is." "I know one place we can look for him. I can take you there in the morning." "Where's that?" asked Julie. "It's just a short walk from here," said Marcy. "Several organizations have set up an animal shelter. They are finding stranded pets all the time. I bet they have hundreds of animals there by now. Great, said Julie. Why don't you walk with us so you can see where our tent is? As the three of them strolled through the tents, Julie's mother asked Marcy, Do you and your family know what you are going to do now? I guess we'll go to Atlanta to stay with my uncle. Eventually we hope to come back here, but that's probably ages away. What will you and Julie do? I haven't given it a lot of thought, Marcy, said Mama. I do have a sister in Baltimore, so maybe we'll go up there. It sure will be a long time before people will be able to come back to New Orleans, Julie added. Yeah, Marcy said. The news today reported that it'll take at least 2 weeks to pump the city dry, and that's once the levees are fixed. This is our tent, Marcy, said Mama. Number 136. Okay, said Marcy. I'll come by and get you in the morning, Julie, and we'll go dog hunting. After Marcy left, Julie turned to her mother. Mama, do you think that I will find Toby tomorrow? I sure hope you do, honey. I know how much he means to you. Then her mother added with a smile, And you know, I miss the little guy too. Sleep came easily to Julie and her mother. They found that after being shut up in a hot, sticky, humid apartment, the cool air in the tent felt almost like air conditioning. In the morning, Julie woke to see Marcy standing over her. Come on, lazy bones. I've been up for an hour. What time is it? Julie asked. It's 7:30. Get dressed. Then we'll have breakfast and go look for your dog. The Red Cross had set up a large tent where meals were served. Julie was amazed at the amount of food. There were eggs, bacon, rice and beans, toast and muffins, and fresh fruit. They also had pancakes, milk, juice and coffee. Julie looked at Marcy and whispered, Who's paying for all of this? My mother says that people throughout the country and even from all over the world have sent money to help the victims of the hurricane. The tents and everything in them have been donated. When my family and I go to Atlanta, we will get free bus tickets. If you need clothes, shoes, or just about anything, people are willing to help. Wow, said Julie. I never knew that people cared. Neither did I, answered Marcy, but it sure is nice to know they do. Chapter 7. It took the girls 20 minutes to reach the animal shelter. The shelter had been set up by the SPCA, Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and was funded by animal lovers around the United States. Cages and pens stretched as far as Julie could see. Gee, Julie said, it'll take us all day to check all these cages. Oh, we don't have to do that, Marcy replied. They take a picture of every animal when it comes in. All the photos are posted on large notice boards. As they neared the notice boards, a man wearing a shirt that read Animal Rescue asked if he could help them. Julie explained that she was looking for her dog that had run away hours before the storm hit. He's small, maybe 9 kilograms. He's brown, with a little white on his face and the tip of his tail. His name is Toby. The man thought for a moment and then said, We try to post the photos by breed of dog or cat. It makes it a lot quicker for people to locate a pet. If Toby is here, he's probably with the terriers. They walked past several notice boards with hundreds of photos. One board contained just photos of cats. Julie looked to see if she could find a photo of the cat she had held yesterday in the boat. Sure enough, there it was. Look, Marcy, there's the cat we rescued off a roof yesterday. Julie turned to the man and asked, How many animals have been brought in? Over 800 so far, but we know that there are many more out there. We have 6 boats going around the city just looking for stray pets. The sad thing is that many people left their pets tied up. Those people thought they were doing the right thing, but some of those pets will have drowned. That's awful, Julie said. Here is the terrier section. See if you can find your Toby. There were over 150 photos to view. Julie and Marcy studied the board carefully. Finally, Marcy cried, "This looks like Toby." Julie looked over Marcy's shoulder at the picture. "I can't be sure," she said, "but it sure does look like him." "Well, let's go and find him," the man suggested. They walked together to a large pen with about 20 dogs in it. Julie walked up to the fence and yelled, "Toby!" Hearing his name for the first time in days, Toby ran across the pen and tried to jump out into her arms. The man reached down and picked him up. He handed the dog to Julie. Toby began licking the tears that fell from Julie's eyes. The man said, "Every time I see a person find their pet and see such happiness, I know all our work is worthwhile." "Can I take him with me now?" asked Julie. "You can, just as soon as you sign a piece of paper. Usually we ask to see some proof of ownership, but anyone can see that Toby is your dog." While walking back to the office to sign the papers, Julie said to Toby, "Why did you run away from me?" The man with her said, "Is that how you lost him? He just ran away?" "Yeah, he was acting funny. He was whimpering and crying, and when I took him outside, he just ran off. It was the first time in 3 years that he'd left my side." Some animals can sense things before they occur. Maybe he knew something was about to happen, the man said. Julie signed the paper, and she and Marcy headed back to the tent village. Toby ran along beside them, but he never let Julie get more than 3 meters away from him. Chapter 8. When the girls got back to Marcy's tent, they were surprised to see that all the suitcases were packed. Patty came out carrying a box. "What's going on, Patty?" asked Marcy. "You had better get your stuff together, Marcy. We're leaving for Atlanta this afternoon," her sister answered. Marcy was happy to be getting out of the tent and back into a real house, but it did mean saying goodbye to her best friend. She got her uncle's address and gave it to Julie. "Write to me and send me your address when you get settled." "I will," said Julie. They stood outside the tent hugging each other and sobbing. Marcy's mother came out and said, "Now girls, this isn't the end of the world. You can keep in touch with emails and an occasional phone call. Hopefully, we will all be together again in New Orleans soon." Julie sighed and said, "I guess so." "Maybe you can visit me," added Marcy. "But don't bring the mutt," yelled Patty. Marcy's mother smiled and said, "Don't mind her, Julie." And she added, "I'm really happy you found your dog." When Julie got to her tent, she ran in and said, "Mama, look, I got Toby back." "That's wonderful," Mama replied. She picked Toby up and gave him a big kiss. "No more running off," she said. "Marcy and her family are leaving for Atlanta this afternoon," Julie said. "In a day or 2, we will be leaving too." "What do you mean, Mama?" "While you were gone, I had a long telephone call with my sister. They have plenty of room and would love for us to stay as long as needed. The school is just 2 blocks from their house. She's going down this afternoon to get you enrolled." "Wow," was all Julie could say. "My sister thinks she can get me a job where she works. So, as soon as we can get on a plane or a bus, we're heading north." "Will we ever come back here, Mama?" "I just don't know, honey. Some people are saying New Orleans should be rebuilt on higher ground. That means moving it inland a few miles. Others want to rebuild it on the same site, but strengthen the levees to handle storms like Katrina. Whatever happens, it could take years." Julie thought about what Mama had said. "I guess you're right, but it's sad to leave our home." Her mother smiled and said, "It helps if you think of this as the beginning of a new, exciting adventure."
Squawk the plank!
Yo ho, it's off the plank you go.
Type the word. Type a letter to start. Clue. A seabird with a very big beak.
Sorry, matey. Try again. Ahoy, matey. Fantastic spelling. Ooh, try again. Sorry, matey. Try again. Well, bury me boots in a cookie jar, matey. That was good. Ooh, ruined. Try again. Ooh, try again. Ahoy, matey. Fantastic spelling. Ahoy, matey. Fantastic spelling. Pickle me parrots, matey. You can spell better than I. Well, I'll be a landlubber's lollipop. That was good.
Pelican. Well done. You saved the pirate from the shark. Click Next to get another word. Clue. A platform overlooking the street.
Shiver me timbers, matey. Great spelling. Well, I'll be a landlubber's lollipop. That was good. Ahoy, matey. Fantastic spelling. Pickle me parrots, matey. You can spell better than I. Pickle me parrots, matey. You can spell better than I. Pickle me parrots, matey. You can spell better than I.
Balcony. Excellent. You saved the pirate. Click Next to get another word. Clue. An earth wall to stop flooding.
Sorry, matey. Try again. Ahoy, matey. Fantastic spelling. Pickle me parrots, matey. You can spell better than I. Ooh, storm a brewing. Try again. Keep your wits about yer.
You have already used that letter. You have already used that letter.
Sorry, matey. Try again. Ooh, storm a brewing. Try again. Keep your wits about yer. Sorry, matey. Try again. Keep your wits about yer. Ooh, try again.
Bye-bye.
Try that word again. Clue. An earth wall to stop flooding.
Shiver me timbers, me great storm a brewing. Try again. Swab the deck with me old red socks and try again. Storm a brewing. Try again. Sorry, matey. Try again. Keep your wits about yer. Ooh, try again. Keep your wits about yer. Sorry, matey. Try again. Sorry, matey. Try again.
Bye-bye.
Oops. The word was levy. Better luck next time. Type your name and click on Next.
Story Toolbox. Type your name and click Next. Create a new story. Have fun clicking on the buttons. Then drag items onto the board to make a picture. Type or write your story underneath the picture. Click Next to make another page or click Finish to view your story. Fantastic work! Click Save to save your story, click Print to print your story, or click Start Again to make another story.